5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the EUVC Lowdown, the show wrapping up the week in European venture. I'm your host, Cathy White. Let's jump into the headlines this week. A new collective of 120 venture firms has launched the UK's Impact VC programme and unveiled the VC Impact Playbook, a guide for European investors unfamiliar with impact-led returns. The group aims to share industry knowledge on leveraging ROI and ESG value from impact-led investments. Firms involved in the collective include Ananda Impact Ventures, Balderton, Partech, and Stride. A new report from the UK's VC Association shows that founders require better signposting to external funding. 4 in 10 founders said they needed better information on accessing external funding, and more than 9 in 10 anticipated their next capital raise within 2 years. Brunner Capital revealed the Ross Index this week, showing that European universities are leading the world when it comes to turning founders of fast-growing open source startups, with France's Epitech IT school leading the way. The full report selects the top 20 open source startups by their growth at GitHub quarterly. You can find out more over on their website. With 1/12 of the year complete, seriously, when the fuck did that happen? TechEU has crunched the data on the deals, exits, and to quote, a less than stellar start to the year. While the number of deals announced this January is fairly in line with last year, there was a 60% drop in the amount invested. And interestingly, debt funding makes up almost a third of the capital announced this past month. UK startups raised the most capital, followed by France and Germany, and fintech proved to be the top vertical. But over at Sifted, it reported that January was a record month for European M&A deals, with a total of 378 deals reported. In new funds this week, Germany has unveiled a new €1 billion fund for deep tech and climate tech growth stage companies. This is weeks after France announced plans to invest €500 million into deep tech alongside other initiatives. The German Deep Tech and Climate Funds, or DTCF, is part of the federal government's €10 billion future fund launched in 2020 and its European recovery programme. In London, and continuing a bit of a theme in deep tech, Silicon Roundabout Ventures officially launched. You might remember our guest Francesco from last week's show. According to his interview with Sifted, the fund, which is targeting £10 million, is looking to address the lack of specialist deep tech VCs with a technical background in Europe. 96% of investors in the UK have never worked in a technical role, which, Francesco says, means that potentially groundbreaking tech is often missed. In recent years, other funds such as Luna Ventures have also launched with the same mission. And even closer to home, the EUVC team has launched its LP syndicate into Smock Ventures to allow European angels, operators, and execs to become part of CEE's premier hard-hitting community and back and support CEE's software and game dev founders. For more information on that, you can head over to the EUVC website. If you have news you'd love to highlight on the Lowdown, you can find me, Cathy White, on LinkedIn or Twitter at CathyWhite10. Please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Joining us on today's show, we have Yana, partner at Pretiosum Ventures, which is now my favorite name ever to pronounce, particularly because she actually provided Pretty Awesome in brackets so that I couldn't not say the name correctly. So Pretiosum Ventures, a venture capital firm focusing on the future of businesses, B2B, Web 2 and Web 3 infrastructure. In Yana's own words, and imagine some bunny ears going up here, essentially we invest in boring companies your business should care about. Despite only launching in 2019, they've already had several high-profile exits within the portfolio and are working on a second fund. We're also joined by Bogdan, the solo GP of Underline Ventures, a new fund that partners with Eastern Europe-based, globally minded early-stage startup founders. And of course, this week I am joined by Andreas of the EUVC team, who wasn't here last week. So first of all, Andreas, how are you? You had a break or a holiday last weekend, so you couldn't join us on the show.
Oh, it was great because it resulted in me getting sick, and then after it's my wife and daughter getting sick for now on the 4th day. So we are so happy we did that holiday.
Oh, bless you. Just before we hit record, we're all just saying, actually, a few of us do have cold. You might hear it a little bit in my throat. It's starting to creep up. I've been suffering with it all week. It's the season, and I don't really want to take away the lesson that you shouldn't go on holiday because you'll get sick. I think it's meant to be the opposite way around.
It's not for people that work a lot, I believe. Then we tend to then get sick when we rest.
When we stop. So all just a big proof point that we should probably rest more often and not just bank it all into a proper holiday. Life lesson. There you go. First thing on the EUVC Lowdown podcast. So I actually have got a more serious topic that I'm going to drop into. So we'll stop talking about colds and holidays. The first thing that I want to discuss with you all today is the closure of the UK's tech nation, reported literally everywhere earlier this week. So on Tuesday, I couldn't go on social media without seeing at least someone in the UK going, I'm so sad to see the closure of Tech Nation. I was kind of looking forward to someone being like, woohoo, great, it's going to Barclays, just to see something different in the conversation. But sadly, Tech Nation is closing up shop at the end of March after the UK government, through the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, awarded its £12 million digital growth grant to Barclays Eagle Labs, the startup division of the bank, which has proved very controversial since it was first announced. Having started in 2011 as an initiative to drive international investment to London's tech city, over the years, Tech Nation scaled, and the scope of the organisation changed to cover the whole of the UK and run a variety of programmes to support startups of all sizes. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you all about this on, the European Lowdown podcast is, for a long time, Tech Nation's kind of been seen as like a key pillar within the UK. It's done a huge amount for a lot of startups, including more than half of the UK's unicorns. But it's done more than just support the startups. It's done a lot to support talent as well. And with Brexit and now this, I think it puts a big question mark on whether talent are going to want to go to the UK. Add in the cost of living crisis and how cold it is, and the fact that it doesn't have as good a wine as Spain, just a personal opinion. There's a lot of things that I think right now aren't working. And the UK government continues to drum, we want to be the next Silicon Valley. And I don't think that's possible with what they're doing right now. But first of all, let's focus on what I was just talking about, which was the talent side of things. And Yana, this is one of the reasons that I asked for you to come onto the podcast, because you've actually been involved as an ambassador to the Tech Nation visa scheme. I've seen multiple people across social media. There's a really heartfelt article on Sifted written by someone as well who's really worried about this because they've moved to the UK and the scheme has been a big part of that. What do you think is next for talent? Have you heard anything about what might be happening with the visa scheme?
If I can just start before that, right? Obviously when Brexit happened, it was an important decision, important departure of the UK from an existing network of countries that facilitated exchanges of people, goods and services. The independence has its cost, but it also has its advantages if well managed. So one of the biggest leverage factors is an efficient tax policy, which UK now can independently establish, and it also has the ability to compete for talent and companies without limitations. Now we can say that it had the ability to compete for talents and companies without limitations. I'm a big advocate of Tech Nation. To me, Tech Nation is a family. It's a big family outside of in the UK. So if you're immigrated tech talent and you come to the UK, Tech Nation is your first step to immerse into the tech ecosystem, get support, get funding, and get anything you want just to be able to succeed in the UK and bring UK on the front of the innovation age in Europe. So the decision when it was taken, it was a big shock to everyone around, because then Tech Nation is a non-profit organization. It was supported by the UK government, which said that they want to bring more talents to the UK to make the UK great again, right? And the decision was very controversial to take it to the bank, because again, Tech Nation has a lot of scale-up programs. 95% of the companies that went through the Tech Nation Accelerator program have gone on to scale and get funding, and we have 122 unicorns, and Tech Nation companies are 1/3 of all these unicorns. So the decision was, it really, I think it will affect the whole ecosystem. And then, because again, when you have uncertainty, and even among our Tech Nation community in Slack, we have all this fear and anxiety around what's going to happen next. All the people are coming now to the UK keep asking questions like, when do you think I will be able to secure my visa after end of March, when the Tech Nation will close their doors? So it's still very much a lot of uncertainty. There's a panic coupled with the struggling economy, and I'm not sure that it will encourage a lot of prospective immigrants to look to the UK instead of looking at France or Portugal or even UAE when they allowed a golden visa at the moment.
Two phrases that you said when you were talking that really stuck out to me. One of them was "if well managed," So dependent on your political sway and everything, I think in the UK, I think even those that probably are conservative voters right now might look at that and go, yes, if well managed, not something that's been managed for quite a while under the current government. And the second one is that, again, we're back to this word of uncertainty. Weirdly enough, so I used to work for Tech Nation. I was the head of comms back in 2016. My first week on the job was the week that we voted to leave. And for 4 months after that, I got phone calls from every major newspaper around the world wanting the answer to, we've heard the UK is on fire. Can you comment? What does this mean for tech? And actually Tech Nation did a really good job, right? Like, it progressed forward. It brought together a lot of various different programs around the UK and more people. It's very sad that it's now going, but we don't seem to very often be leaving this uncertain period. We keep falling back into it, like Brexit, pandemic, and then British government making stupid decisions. Anyway, that's my personal opinion. But with all of this going on, yeah, Yana, go for it. I've got another question coming up, but you want to make a point?
Tech Nation, for me, it's a part of a family that unite people coming to the UK, well, to bring innovation and bring diversity and cultural diversity primarily, and like get together and like bring like new innovation to the UK, to Europe, and to the world. Out of our first fund, out of 12 companies that I invested, we have 8 companies that have founders on the Tech Nation visa. So, and then the companies are doing great. And recently there was a report about Faces of Tech Nation, right? And then, well, they estimated that myself through investments, we have 1 billion of value bringing to the UK, and it's only from me. And then there's other people that are bringing innovation and value to the economy of the UK. So now again, it's a lot of uncertainty, and seems like we already get used to this word, in the recent years.
Can I start with a question? So I've also read the news, and yeah, I know a bit of Tech City, I think initially, right? And then Tech Nation. I've seen that the issue with this change was the fact that the organization wasn't able to be self-sufficient outside of the governmental grant, right? So that was the official motivation, I from what I've read.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that was the official motivation, but a lot of us very cynical people are going, great, so they gave the money to a bank.
Yeah, so that's like the second half of the decision doesn't really make sense at all, I think. Yeah. Although I'm sure that those folks are doing a great job, but just like the transfer from one entity to the other sounds a bit, I don't know, just like weird. But apart from that, I was just wondering, getting talent nowadays, and basically since forever in tech, it's such a massive added value for companies. You have this program, and UK is a great country. You have great tech industry, a lot of very smart people working there. I'm sure that other talented people want to join them and do stuff. How come it's not like a possibility to build something which is really like sustainable, actually brings a lot of cash by helping founders and talent get into the UK and work with tech companies? I mean, this should be a cash machine.
Yeah, it should be. It should be. This is where I go back to frustration around the whole thing, because the government does, every time government has to do a big speech or anything, they'll consistently drill back building the next Silicon Valley in Europe, the next Silicon Valley in the UK. And really what they mean by that is not the UK, they mean London. But the actions don't match. They want to attract the best talent. You make it as easy as possible for that talent to get to you in order to build. There's so many questions I have that I want to hit people in government basically and be like, why? Anyway, Andreas.
Yeah, so I'm sitting here thinking, first of all, the statement of the next Silicon Valley of Europe, is being used by every single government about every single vertical. I also think that there's two things in this, right? Because it's not the closure of an ambition, right? It's the closure of a program, or even it's not even the closure. It's the movement of a program from one entity that manages it to another, which then has the fatal consequence to the unit that used to run that program, right? So in that sense, I think it's, at least as I perceive it, not entirely correct to say that government has lowered ambitions, but government has, made the discretionary decision to pass it on to someone else, right? Which then I think most would say that I'm a socialist capitalist or venture capitalist. So I definitely do not believe it's a good idea to put it in the hands of a bank. From every ideological standpoint, I think that's a very bad idea. I also think that the rules that we tend to use to pass out these programs with are heavily flawed, because they are almost inherently built to not be allowed to consider the most important part, which is what's already built. And that's the problem, right? It's not what is going, who manages it going forward, but it's what's going to be left on the floor now because of the loss of, as an example, who's going to be running those Slack groups that Yana is really using to both navigate her life, help others navigate their life, and even, find the founders that she wants to invest in. That is probably not something that was put well into the bid that Barclay wrote for, management of the program, but it's something that's been built around Technation and around the program that has value that no one can really measure. And thus, I actually think that this is yet another failure of public procurement rather than it being politically a bad decision. You just sometimes put yourself in a very tough spot because of rules, and you hadn't thought things through entirely before you started building out that bid. So I think that it's just, I think there's an important thing to say there around who is to blame and what is to blame, and is it motivations or what is it? I think there's a huge learning for every European country, right? Really think about how you deal with things that are so integral to the VC and startup and tech ecosystem, and make sure that you have the core stakeholders very, very close to you, because if they had listened, then this would never have happened.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Andreas, about it. Just wanted to add something. So the government, so the Barclays got this grant from the government for only 2 years, right? And then it's subject to renewal, meaning that, to our current uncertainty, we add more uncertainty, because by the time, Barclays, hopefully they will manage and get it to the right place, they will establish, there will be a new bid for this contract, and we never know what will happen next.
With this handover as well, right? So you've got 2 years, then you've got the potential for renewal. 2 years isn't a very long time to prove the worthiness of your programs, given you've got
a huge program like this takes 2 years just to hand over.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So
and then also there is another point that Bogdan mentioned, right, about how come the Technation was not able to turn it into the cash machine. But then we need to ask the question about whether initially it was supposed to be a cash machine, or when we can also speak about startups and profitability. Sometimes it's when it comes to the Technation, initially it was a government entity that is granting visas and supporting tech entrepreneurs or tech companies setting up in the UK. So then probably during the lifetime of Technation from 2011 to 2016 and onwards, maybe the objectives have changed, and they require Technation to get some money out of this program. I don't know, but then in essence, the objective initially was different.
Bogdan mentioned earlier, I think publicly, maybe on a European level, the consideration was that the first version of Technation was called Tech City. The full name was TCIO, it was Tech City Investment Organization, and its specific remit at the time was about attracting investors to London. So it was about bringing money in, but again, not for Tech City, not for Technation, but for the startups that were part of that. Bogdan, you go.
I just wanted to add that probably a bit of the outcry is also regarding the fact that Technation is not a program, it's actually a community, and communities are way more difficult to handle over because they are centered around a group of people, a group of values. I think the issue here is pirates versus the marine. So you have this independent organization which were sort of the pirates, and then you have the more corporate Barclay program which are the marine. And can you handle a community which has certain values? Can you move it to the other side? I think that's also a bit of that. And if you evaluate Technation strictly as a program, probably you'll get a different score that you would evaluate them as a community. I've seen this over and over again being let's say mishandled whenever doing grants or stuff like that. I think the bigger issue regarding the capability of actually having a long-term program that works for the people who want to join and go to the UK and benefit from all these programs, connected with what your government requires. You mentioned that it's a 12 million grant for 2 years, so that means 6 million per year, but that doesn't have to be, so the organization doesn't have to depend on the 6 million that they get from the government, right? So that means that you have to award this grant to an organization which makes probably 10 to 15 million apart from this grant. Are there actually any other organizations in the UK that make so much money from providing a lot of mostly free or low cost services to founders. I just think this in itself is an issue. I mean, who can you select? You obviously select a bank because they have a large balance sheet and they can sort of solve the cash problem in the future somehow, at least on paper.
Yeah. So as far as I'm aware, with the grant, the way that it will work is every single penny of that grant has to be matched against the running of a program. And the way it worked at Tech Nation was that they had their grants that did everything. It covered their staff, it covered the running of the programs. And then anything where there was a shortfall, they did involve sponsors. So they would have corporate partners, it could be law firms, it could be AWS, whatever, coming in to also work alongside them for the programs. But the whole thing from the beginning, it's not for profit. It's not about making profit. It's about using that money in order to propel the startups forward for that growth to come. So with the bank, slightly different. I know that my cynicism just assumes that it's a Conservative Party sponsor that thought this would look good for them, grassroots activity, fantastic, but we'll see. On that note, moving from non-profit, I want to bring in our next topic of conversation. You'll appreciate the smoothness of my transition in a moment. A new word in the VC lexicon, guys, profitability. The reason we're bringing this up, if you are a reader of the EUVC Lowdown newsletter or any of the newsletters, any of the podcasts, you will see this coming up shortly. An increase in companies being told about profitability, being pushed for profitability, maybe some frustrations from startups who haven't really heard their VCs ever use the word profitability when they've had conversations in the past. For fun, for a bit of an open conversation, let's dive into changes in the market and the fact that there is a push for businesses to be more profitable now. Andreas, you actually raised this topic when we were chatting earlier in the week, and I know you've been speaking with Chris as well over at ISMA. What are you hearing from them? What are you seeing happening?
What I am seeing, at least, is that there is a bit of a hand washing after, and we've had that for 6-9 months in the VC ecosystem, where everyone is saying the word profitability now and talking about being sustainable and everything in your unit economics. But there's not many that are quick to say, yeah, I recognize that I've never said it before. At least inside the community, I'd hope that we as VCs would be more honest and more, forthcoming towards the founder ecosystem and say, yeah, we know that we fucked up as well. We forgot about the fundamentals of business for some time and let ourselves run along with imagination that the trees do grow into the sky, because of course they don't. and we all knew that it would come tumbling down at some point. And I think that a bit too many didn't see that coming early enough and didn't prepare their founders. But I'd love, Bogdan and Yana, for you to challenge me on this statement and also talk a bit about what you've done yourselves.
I would replace profitability with survivability for now. I think the key element that everybody is looking at is to create companies that can survive for some time if the next round of financing doesn't just click in right. Definitely there is a return to the basics of building a business, venturable or not. But I think that in the last 2 to 3 years, the venture community was very much aligned with the public market. So you sort of had to play by the rules which were created by the public market, and you had a lot of trickle down effect from there, from the public markets to the growth investors to Series A investors, and Series A investors to seed. I would not blame not only the venture community for this. I think it was just like a big bubble in which we all lived for a while, and then it popped.
It's interesting you referenced the bubble that popped. I want to just read part of the quote that has gone into Chris's text that he shared with us, which has come from a founder, I believe, a conversation with one of Berlin's star growth companies. For 5 years, not a single investor asked me when or how we would be profitable. I think that's concerning, right? It's characteristic of the craziness that happened in the last few years in VC investments. Now it's turned completely and everybody only asks about when will you be profitable. From my point of view, and I believe this is Chris speaking now, it was irrational to only look at growth in 2021, but it's also very irrational to only look at profitability now.
I think we all need to look at it as a bundle. What has happened in 2021 and 2022? So we had an enormous, the bull run when everyone is jumping on companies being created with enormous speed, and then VCs are jumping on a crazy valuations. So now we have what we're supposed to have. Now we see, quote unquote, the fruits what has happened. And so for most of the market now is about making sure that the existing portfolio is well funded to be able to live throughout the more challenging market, as Bogdan mentioned. And as new investments are less frequent, down rounds more frequent, and then we'll see more down rounds. And internal rounds as a norm now. The best VCs I know, they've been disciplined throughout this, the bull market. So they know that what valuation they're coming in, what valuation they're not coming in, and just being disciplined and know your ground. I think it's all about, this is a long-term game, and you can't jump on every trend you see, and you can't jump on every hot company you think will make, pay your whole fund out, right? It's about being disciplined, know your ground, and you know what sort of companies you will be invested throughout, the lifetime of the fund.
I think we have to remember that, venture companies still have to grow, and without growth, they are not venture companies. So profitability is great, but I think growth is still more important than that, up to a limit, to which growth becomes unsustainable.
We've built in venture behemoths of companies that need so large cash piles because they've grown so big on the venture funding that when the unit economics are off, it's not a matter, when you lose a bit of money every time you sell, it doesn't matter that much if you're small, right? Because then, it doesn't take more than a couple of million to then bridge you for a year. But when you're huge and still have that flaw in your business model, you're no longer going to market asking for a couple of million, then you're almost asking for a couple of billion. And that is very, very difficult for anyone to justify if you don't have a very clear path to profitability. And the case that Chris comments on here is a growth company, right? It is absolutely fitting to be saying to portfolio companies now, we need to focus more on profitability. We need to get closer to profitability, and we need to do it very, very quickly. Where I feel that we have wronged founders is not what we're saying today, it's what we haven't said for 2 years. And I think, on the venture side, we've probably all, and I'm not a growth stage investor, but I'm pretty sure that growth stage investors have said, well, we know that we're coming in now at a valuation that requires the multiples on MRR to be quite considerable. We cannot live with multiples on an IPO that would look like something we had 2 years ago. It needs to be in the 20x and so on. And then you said, okay, are we ready to do that, or are we not? And I think in many cases, VCs or growth stage investors made that jump and said, it'll probably last, it'll work, where they also knew that they took on a risk and it was part of a portfolio and so on. So for that reason, they were willing to do it. But the founders and the companies and everyone who were employed in those companies don't have that measurement, right? They don't have a portfolio of 5 or 10 other bets that will then make up for the shortcomings when it actually ends up not working out, right? And I think that is where we have lost our way in VC a bit in that period. There were not enough speaking the founder's case or the company's case, and saying you need to remember that this might go wrong as well, and is this then the best approach and so on. And I think that you have an inherent responsibility towards the people who have given you the capital to manage, to not be speaking against your own case, of course, but at the same time, you also have a reputation as a VC where, if things go wrong, you need to be on the right side of history, because if founders all feel betrayed in terms of what you've said for years, and then when the bubble pops, that you're not on the right side of history, then it's going to be difficult to come back on. And I think we've seen that as an example with Tiger Global, who have definitely been out committing both to managers and founders that they will be there, and then they ended up not being there, right? And I think they will have a tough time coming back to the VC market and gain that trust again.
Thinking, Andreas, you're being very profound today, which is great.
Trying to.
Like a VC guru. I love it. On that note, that is all for this week's episode. Make sure to check out the EUVC newsletter over on EUVC and follow us on LinkedIn, where we'll continue the conversation. If you want to get involved in the podcast as well, we're eager to add more voices to the Lowdown community. So please get in touch. And until next week, have a good one.